About 25 years ago, Henry and I traveled to Germany. We got German rail passes so that we were able to travel anywhere we wanted for just one fee. Now, wanting to be good stewards of our travel budget, we consulted a travel guide, Voter's Dollar-Wise Guide to Germany. And most of the time, we were pointed in a good direction, with the exception of our trip to Munich. We chose to stay at a place called the Evergreen, reputed to be a perennial favorite for tourists returning to Munich. It was located in an undesirable part of town, clean but not particularly comfortable. But it wasn't the location or the comfort of the room that bothered us. It was the lack of hospitality that we experienced there. A continental breakfast came with our lodging, and when we went down to the breakfast room in the morning, there was this big sign. Now, I cannot remember the exact words on the sign, but it was exactly this blunt. "This is all you get for breakfast," with a list of the food. It was a stingy welcome. It was lousy hospitality, and I turned to Henry and I said, "I'm not eating here." Now, I wanted to leave our breakfast rolls on the table, really make a statement about how I felt. But Henry, good German, frugal that he is, he insisted on taking them along so that we could feed the ducks at the English garden. After feeding the ducks, we were looking around for different lodging, and we found another place in a private home next to the English garden. Seeing a sign in the window that there was a room available, we went up the walk and we knocked on the door. We were welcomed warmly by an incredibly gracious woman. Henry and I still remember how much we enjoyed our stay in Munich because of this woman's hospitality. Now, on Saturday morning, we asked our hostess if she could direct us to a local Lutheran church. She got a little bit of a grumpy look on her face for a second, and then she directed us to her own Roman Catholic church. I think it was St. Mary's. "Das ist meine Kirche." Okay, we went to her Kirche. And it was a really amazing experience. As you may know, churches by and large in Europe are not well attended, but this place was full. I did not understand one word of what was being said in the worship service, but there was that same sense of joy and peace and love that I felt the first time I walked in through the doors at Preston Meadow Lutheran Church. They were showing some slides on a screen. Remember now, this is 25 years ago, so different technology. So I had something to meditate on, but I could not get past just that sense of what an amazingly welcome place this congregation was. So I did not speak English. I did not speak English. Good for me. I do speak English. I did not speak German. Our hostess did not speak any English. And it never occurred to me to try to have a conversation with her through Henry, asking her if or how her experience within that community of faith had really nurtured her own ability to be welcoming of strangers. I really wish that I had had the opportunity to do that, but I strongly suspect that that's what was going on. Is God stingy with limited resources for God's children? Or is God good at heart with abundant resources to share with everyone? And if God is so abundant with grace, how does that speak to who we are as people of faith and as people of grace? The parable we have this morning about the workers in the vineyard may well have been shared first by Jesus with his followers in the context of the Jewish religious leaders and how they tended to get rather grumpy whenever grace was given to someone that they perceived to be undeserving. But Matthew has a stake in sharing this particular parable. Matthew is the only gospel writer to include it, and it is believed that as he shared this story, he shared this within the context of a congregation that consisted of some very long-term members, people who had been there for a long time. Congregation is growing, and they're feeling kind of put out, How come those newbies coming in the door are welcomed the same as we are welcomed when we've been here from the beginning? That is the sense. So that's why we have this parable in Matthew's gospel. Now, the way it comes out is this. A landowner needs help tending his vineyard. He needs help. He knows that there are people who need work. And so in the morning, he goes out to find some workers. He agrees to pay these workers a denarius for the day, which was subsistence living for a family within that culture and in that context. Basic subsistence, difference between life and death. Being hired is a gift because these men do not have to go home empty-handed at the end of the day. They have something they can share with their families that is going to give them one more day of living. So it really is a gift for these people to have been hired first thing in the morning. Now, throughout the day, more help is needed. The landowner goes out, hiring more workers at 9, at noon, at 3, and he even goes out in the 11th hour. One more hour left to work, but he goes out then too, and he sees men standing around, and he says, "What are you doing standing around here?" And they say, "Well, no one's hired us. Will you come too?" And in every other occasion, except with the first group, the landowner says, "I will pay you whatever is fair to pay you." We can imagine the growing sense of dis-ease with those who had not been yet hired throughout the day as time passes, because they're probably worried about going home empty-handed. So we have a sense of what is at stake, and the landowner just invites them to work. Just come work with me. And I can imagine these men thinking to themselves, well, something is better than nothing. At least I can go home with something. Can you imagine the joy of those workers hired at the 11th hour when they are the first ones to receive payment and they get that denarius? Oh my goodness. This landowner is a generous man. They get a full day's wages, as does every other person standing there waiting to be paid. Now, those hired first begin to get a little bit grumpy at this. Now, we need to understand their needs have been met. They have entered into a contract with this landowner, but they begin to grumble and complain because they think they deserve more than the others. Their mindset is one of scarcity. That means that the gift of being able to work and receive payment is somehow seen as less than. Who are these latecomers to receive the same thing as those of us who have done the heavy lifting? God's grace is not limited. It is not given in increments. Either you have no grace or you have God's full grace. There is no way to divide up just how much grace should be shared. God gives full grace and it is grace for all. The landowner, whom we understand to be God or representing God, takes one of the men aside. He reminds him that they had a contract and that the landowner has fulfilled that contract. It is his money to do with as he chooses. And then the landlord asks a question. Are you envious because I am generous? Now, the word translated envious literally means, do you have an evil eye because I am jealous? You got a vision problem, mister? Are you jealous because I've been generous with others, as though it somehow took away from you? Matthew will use the phrase I. He uses the phrase hardness of heart, which means I'm focused on me, myself, and I. And when he uses the phrase evil eye, it is a metaphor because the eyes are supposed to be the lamp for the whole body, and something is wrong with your way of seeing because you are not seeing generosity in action. Preston Meadow is one of the most grace-filled and generous congregations I have ever been blessed to serve. When Hurricane Harvey hit the southern part of our state, our council approved a gift of $3,000. Word was put out to our congregation members, and the funds grew quickly. I do not know what the exact amount was, the final tally, but I do know that it was over $25,000. Some of our members traveled to Pastor Marvin's congregation to help muck out the congregation. We do not have a congregation with an evil eye. We have a congregation with a very good vision for what needs to happen, and with a very strong heart for what needs to be done. So we are aware of that kind of goodness. If attendance seems a little bit light this morning at second service, it's because many of our men are out at a golf game, which is intended to be a charity event to help raise funds for PMLC youth to go on their mission trips, because mission trips are important. Teaching youth about the importance of reaching out also matters. And so it is a priority. And as I share these stories, I'm not sharing them as a one-time only story, because throughout the year, there always seems to be something going on, and members of our congregation tend to be incredibly generous in what we share. But I do want to suggest that even so, we might want to have a few thoughts related to what else we could be doing with an eye to sharing God's grace in the world. Now, when we come to worship, one of the things we like best, besides the worship, is that we get to connect with our friends. That's a great thing when we do that, but sometimes we can get so involved in talking with our friends because we love them and because it's fun, that we might miss newcomers here, or we might even miss somebody who usually goes to the 8:30 service when they come to the 11 o'clock service, because we don't all know each other as members once did. So it's a good idea to just kind of keep your eye out on Sunday morning and to remember that you too are an ambassador of sharing God's grace. If you see somebody you don't know, go introduce yourself, introduce them to your friends. When we speak of our mission statement, connecting people to Christ's mission of grace for God's world, remember that that means you. Not just as a congregational statement, but yes, me too, and how I am within this congregation. And then when we are away from this congregation during the week after worship, think about being a grace dispenser in the world. Our mission, remember, is connecting people to Christ's mission of grace for God's world. You never know what a kind word, a smile, or a blessing can mean for someone else who feels alone in a world that is often inhospitable. These are anxious times. You turn on the news and it's very easy to become upset by what we see happening in our country and around the world. So simply going out into the world and being a welcoming person with others helps to sort of regulate that sense of this world being unfriendly and remind folks that we're not all that way. In 2006, my brother and I went to Hungary with our spouses. Different trip. We made more money over the years. This time we got to stay at the Hilton. Hooray. We had made the decision to do this after our mother's death. It was a way of honoring her memory, and was also a way of connecting with our own ethnic roots. Although my mother was born in Hungary, she really did not share her culture with us. People sometimes ask me, did your mother teach you how to cook Hungarian food? No, I got cookbooks after I got older, and I learned. But here we are. We've had a wonderful trip. It's the last day now, and Henry's gone down to check out and to get help getting our baggage out. And I was standing alone in the breakfast room taking one last look, looking out over the vista, and feeling kind of sad. It was sad because my mother had never shared her culture with us, and I had visited as a tourist, not as somebody coming back to a homeland, but taking the tours that everybody else was. The hostess in the breakfast room asked me, "Did you enjoy your stay in our country?" And I replied that, well, yes, I had. But then I said, but you know, this is a little bit my country too. My mother was born in Hungary, and so as I leave, I'm leaving a little piece of my heart here. I received one of the warmest hugs I have ever received from a perfect stranger. It was a personal connection to my homeland. No matter who we are or where we are born, we all share in a common homeland. That homeland is the God who created and redeemed us. The currency of our homeland is grace. The grace we are given, an amazing gift, will never run out. So no matter how much grace God puts into our lives, it is okay to give it away because there is an endless supply. It's not going to run out. It is not meant to be hoarded. It is meant to be shared with others. May God bless us all as we go out into the world as grace dispensers, dispensing what we ourselves have received from God. We become signs and witnesses of our homeland, God, and signs and witnesses of God's currency in the world, endless and amazing grace.